will try to keep that short because it's a very long story in a lot of cases. I went to law school in 2000 to 2003, specifically because I wanted to do patent law. I ended up, after law school, getting a master's of engineering, biomedical engineering, specifically imaging. It's really cool. I love it. Then I went and practiced patent law briefly. Hated it. Absolutely hated it.
My dad's a patent examiner. He was a patent examiner, and he hated it too.
Yeah, it's I liked the theory, but I hated the practice. I still enjoy patent law, but I don't enjoy doing it. You know, the academic study is cool, so that ended up transitioning me into an academic attorney, and that's when I met my wife in real estate in 2005. We bought a whole bunch of real estate pre-bubble in Durham, North Carolina. That we were renovating it, built that up, got into hotels. In 2008, of course, the collapse happened, and I was working night shift at my hotel and got into Bitcoin because I had basically 8 hours of nothing going on. So I was reading, I was playing some video games, EVE Online.
How did you find out about it? EVE Online, huh?
EVE Online, because I was also heavy into Slashdot.
I'm a World of Warcraft gamer.
Oh, excellent.
Classic WoW.
Okay, yeah. So I was on Slashdot too. And I saw the post come across, one of the first posts about Bitcoin. I'm like, well, this is cool. Let me screw around with it. So sometime around 2010, I think, I started mining it. I had this whole hotel with a bunch of idle computers. Back then, it wasn't even GPU mining, they were CPU mining. So I was mining on CPUs throughout the hotel. Whenever a room wasn't occupied, the computer in that room would mine Bitcoin for me. I did that for a couple years. I wanted a motorcycle, so I bought a motorcycle and sold out, and didn't think about it again until 2019.
When did you buy in, and when did you sell out?
Well, I mined in starting at...
When did you start mining?
Starting at about 2010, 2011, and I sold everything in 2013.
Do you regret it?
Of course I do. I will never, ever get back to that level. But the annoying part is, several years later, the motorcycle got stolen, so I don't even have the multi-million-dollar motorcycle, which was a Honda GSX 500, so not even a great motorcycle. But then, I didn't even think about it again until, I watched it, I paid attention, I saw the rise of the ASICs, I toyed with the idea of getting an early ASIC. Thankfully, I did not pull the trigger on a Butterfly Labs, because of course. But then, in 2019, things started feeling wrong. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but I started looking back at Bitcoin. And I admit, I came back to it. I looked at it saying, this is cool. Let's look at other things. Look at Ethereum, look at Cardano. I got back into it through Cardano. I started a node on Cardano. I bought a whole bunch of Cardano.
Not a bad time to buy Cardano.
It was not. It was like 2 cents, 1 cent. Got very into it. But as I alluded to earlier, I'm kind of a massive nerd. So I said, I want to understand this. I want to understand it from the first principles. So I got the white paper. I read the white paper. Then the next thing I read, I think, was like Saifedean's book. But I effectively went through the process of Bitcoin, altcoins, Cardano, wait a minute, it's Bitcoin only. Sold all the Cardano, converted myself 100% to Bitcoin, and that puts us up to early 2020, right before the flash crash of COVID.
What was it in 2019 in hindsight? You said at the time you couldn't really put your finger on it, but what was it in hindsight that you felt was wrong and made you want to go back and look at Bitcoin or look at crypto?
I don't know. I felt... So when we got into the hotels, we bought our first hotel, which was a 17-room bed and breakfast. My wife and I built a historic tax credit rehab, everything. We closed on it like July 2nd of 2008. Lehman Brothers was like 2 or 3 weeks later. We were told by our bank at the time that if we didn't close that day, they wouldn't have had the money to close. So I had a feeling that something was going to happen. Obviously, there's no way I could have predicted COVID or anything like that, but I just felt, it felt 2008-y.
Why? Was it the market? Did you feel like
I
the
think it's the market.
Crazy 10-year bull run.
Yeah, and just that's why I said I can't really put my finger on it. I came back to it for a reason, and maybe it was just it had been gone long enough that I had like percolated enough that it came up on its own. But something drove me back to it in probably about June, July of 19. Mm-hmm. So there was nothing June, July of 19. There's nothing really spectacular going on. I don't recall, but
not particularly.
So I got back into it, and but I kind of had this feeling like something was off, like in 2008. And I lived through that. We were. We had just closed on our hotel. We had everything. We were under construction with all of the money during the collapse. So we actually did well at that point. But then in 2019, I'm learning Cardano, learning that, then switching myself over to Bitcoin, and then started getting into mining again. And in late 2020, 2021.
Still mining?
Yeah, well, my wife and I started a small mining company called Distributed Hash, which she runs now, and that's up also in Wyoming. We have about a megawatt and a half, which is call that 300-ish machines.
Okay. Is it just you two, or do you guys have investors, people that can host miners with you? How does the business work?
We're a hosting company, so
okay.
When we started it in 2021. If you recall the mining landscape back then, everyone wanted to mine. Mm-hmm. There wasn't enough infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So we said, we had a couple of guys and us. We said we can buy, call it $500,000 of miners, or we can buy $500,000 of infrastructure. If we buy the miners, we're in the same boat as everyone else, trying to find some place to plug them in. If we buy the infrastructure, people will beg us to plug their stuff in. Mm-hmm. So we went that route. Bought the infrastructure with the and when we opened, we had no miners of our own.
In Wyoming?
In Wyoming, yeah. And then we realized what we intended to do is we'll start with the infrastructure. We'll pay we'll pay off the debt on the infrastructure. We took a fiat loan for that. We'll pay that off, and over time we'll just acquire equipment, and then we can just plug it in. Because you'll have customers come and go, and as we have spots, we'll buy used equipment and plug it in, and our cost basis on the equipment will be very, very low, and that actually worked out pretty well.
What's the cost of your electricity?
Ours is pretty high. It's 7 cents, mm-hmm. and we're upfront about that. Our customers pay us 9 to 11. Okay, and we're full, even now. Mm-hmm.
So you converted all your Cardano to Bitcoin, became a purist, Bitcoin maxi. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about alts at this point?
On a monetary level, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist all the way. Mm. I can see that there are potentially some use cases for some form of alternate blockchains for very specific purposes. For instance, we all know that DTCC controls stock. Like if you buy a share of stock, you don't actually own it anymore. You own a receipt.
I didn't know that actually.
Okay, well, no. So if you buy a share of stock, unless I don't even know if the physical certificate delivery actually counts anymore. But if you buy a book entry share, DTCC owns it, Depository Trust Company. They own it, and you own a receipt for it.
Okay.
And so if you put securities on a blockchain, you could basically disintermediate DTC.
What's the downside of having that intermediary versus you actually owning?
Well, one downside is because you don't own it, they can short your stock without your permission.
How does that work?
So if you own stock,
I know what shorting is.
Yeah, but if you own the stock and you say you do not lend my stock out to short it, well, they don't have to pay attention to you. You have a receipt. They just have to make sure that when you call it, it's there for you. But not everybody wants their shares to be used for that reason. And maybe there's ways to prevent that, but normal people can't make those calls. Like if a normal person says, "I don't want you to use my shares for this purpose," effectively you don't own it. You just own the right to receive it. You're a beneficial owner, but not the actual owner anymore. And another problem with DTCC is, and I know others can get much more detailed in this, so I could be off in my understanding here, but if they were to have a fault or go down or whatever, since you don't own it and have no record of it, that's all the records are there, then you're hosed, right? If you have bearer instruments like Bitcoin or, for instance, a tokenized security, and I very clearly mean a security. One of the big arguments in altcoins is, are they an asset like Bitcoin or are they a security? I believe they're securities, and I don't think there's a problem with that. Like it is what it lead into it. You are a security, but that just means you have to follow the rules of a security. Okay, cool, do that. But that also, what the blockchain in that case gives you, or is the ability to peer-to-peer, like you could take a share of Apple and I could just give it to you by a single transaction that's recorded on a blockchain, rather than I have to go to my broker and they have to send it to DTC and then boom to your broker and back. So it disintermediates and it improves efficiency and fluidity in a way that you don't have right now. So
is Ethereum that blockchain?
I don't know. I don't know if Ethereum is. I don't know. I don't believe you can do it on Bitcoin, and certainly not right now. Maybe in the future it can be built into some sort of layer 2 or 3. But Ethereum certainly has the capacity to do it. At least as I understand it, with smart contracts, they have the capacity to do it. But to be clear, what I'm not saying is that I don't believe. I think money is a unique use case that Bitcoin is by far and away dominant for, and the alternatives don't have the capacity to touch that.
Couldn't agree more.
I'm not willing to say there are absolutely no reasons why a blockchain could have a purpose, but a lot of the things that they are being applied to, I don't think real estate titles, for instance, should be on a blockchain. The real estate titles are a fundamentally solved problem. Maybe there's a lot of improvements that can be had, but real estate titles are something that basically a centralized database works. So you don't need a distributed database for real estate titles. A distributed database for something like securities makes a lot more sense. They're much more fluid. I mean, you don't sell your house every 5 seconds, but you could easily sell tens of thousands of shares multiple times every 5 seconds.
Right.
So
what about an open marketplace where people can make peer-to-peer real estate transactions without intermediaries or real estate agents and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I can see something like that arising. I just don't necessarily know if a blockchain is necessary.
Sure.
I mean, fundamentally, one of the aspects of real estate is because it is a physically defined object in space in a jurisdiction that can't be picked up and moved. You've got a whole host of governmental controls that are just never going to go away. And one of the aspects of blockchain, at least as I understand it, certainly with respect to Bitcoin, is you give me a Bitcoin, you can't take it back. I have to give it back, right? I have to sign the transaction to send it back.
It's immutable.
It's immutable. Same with if you were to send me a share of stock, you shouldn't be able to come and grab it back. But if you were to send me, a token of your house, does that mean I own the house? No, it doesn't. It means I own the deed to the house. But until the government comes in and says you own the house or not. So now you have a situation where you have an oracle problem and, as I call it, the anti-oracle problem. Which the oracle problem is, what happens on the blockchain. I may get these backwards. One is what happens on the blockchain doesn't directly impact the real world, and what happens in the real world doesn't directly impact the blockchain. You have to have the communication, and in real estate, that communication is the police, the government, coming in and saying, you own it, you don't. And if the blockchain differs from that, but you can't edit it because I won't let you edit it, well, then now the blockchain is worthless.
Before the ETH ETF got approved, a lot of folks were saying that ETH is a security. What are your thoughts on the ETF approval, and do you think ETH is a security? I
think ETH is a security, absolutely. As it exists today, I think ETH is a security. I think there was a potential argument that it wasn't when it was proof of work. But fundamentally, proof of stake, in my mind, and as I understand Howey, you can argue all day that Howey needs to be changed. That's fair. But as Howey exists, I believe that any proof of stake is by definition a security, because the work being put in is by other people, not by a natural process. So, but that doesn't mean it can't be an ETF. We have ETFs of securities, right? I mean, the ETF approval doesn't fundamentally alter that ETH is or is not a security. I mean, QQQ is an ETF of securities. That is fine. So I read a tweet once where someone said that clearly ETH is not a security because the SEC would never have granted an ETF approval because they they got into it being a Ponzi scheme and all this, and I'm thinking, well, we have ETFs of treasuries, and that's clearly a Ponzi scheme, right? I mean, pretty much everyone in crypto looks at the fiat system as basically broken, and we have those. So the fact that the SEC granted ETF approval does not change in any way whether ETH is or is not a security. I think the way it exists as a proof of stake is what makes it a security. If it moved back to proof of work, then we have a discussion as to whether or not it is. But as proof of stake, I mean, proof of stake is fundamentally the Federal Reserve system we have right now. So I think proof of stake is an interesting system, and it definitely is a lot more efficient, and it has value, but it makes it a security.
Do you think that's ever going to change, the Federal Reserve being able to turn the money printer on at whim and just flood the market with dollars?
I think the Federal Reserve, I think it will change eventually, and I think it will be very painful when it does.
Why?
Pretty much because us as a civilization have organized around the fiat system, and there's too much entrenched need for the ability, a belief of need for the ability of governments to control the money supply. You go back, and obviously many others have discussed this in detail much more eloquently than I, but the gold was an excellent system until we needed to move money faster. Fiat became the system that worked. It was better than gold for the economy that we had when it was brought into being. Obviously, it had been tried in prior eras, and it didn't work very well. It doesn't work very well, but it worked well enough, because one fundamental problem with gold is it's big and heavy, right? You can't have a modern digital economy or even a electrical analog economy with gold the way you need to move money more quickly. You need to increase the velocity of money to make that happen. Fiat filled that need with the downside of the moral hazard of the printing. Bitcoin solves the moral hazard problem because it can't be, you can't inflate it, while also solving the velocity problem. And in engineering, you don't like, it's always good to have some constraint, right? Bitcoin has some constraints. Well, people have argued, oh, it's too slow, it's too this, it's too that. Those constraints are not necessarily a bad thing. Like, let's say we take the block size and quadruple it. Well, at the end of the day, that's nothing. I mean, you've 4x something when really you need to 10,000x it.
Sure.
Well, if you 10,000x it, now you completely annihilate, and some people would argue that you would completely annihilate the decentralization aspect by 4x.
It's a trilemma.
Yeah. So the only way around this is by layering. And that is the system we have today. The Federal Reserve, the FedWire, I believe, processes roughly 7 to 10 transactions per second, which is roughly the same as Bitcoin. They just do it on trillions of dollars at a time, whereas Bitcoin does it on much smaller amounts. But that doesn't mean Bitcoin couldn't scale if the purchasing power of a Bitcoin became so high. And the way that happens is, yes, we do need to be able to have microtransactions. And you build that in layers. Does that mean that everybody gets completely durable self-custody at the base layer, no, that was never going to happen. It makes no sense to put a coffee transaction on a ledger that is going to exist for ideally hundreds of thousands of years, or basically,
Sure.
So you don't want that. You want bulk settlement. You want these things. And yes, does this mean that at the end of it, that some of the promise of Bitcoin that we had early on has to be pulled back on? Maybe. But that doesn't mean it's a failure.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I mean, the thing it wins if it forces governments to have responsibility and not dilute the money supply.
Do you think it's starting to have that effect?
I think it's very fast, very, very much having that effect. We're here at the Bitcoin conference. This is the first time in history two of the three presidential candidates are speaking, and there was a brief discussion that the third, the Democrat, would be here as well.
Mm-hmm. Was that a rumor, or do you think that they were actually in talks with her?
I think there was a conversation. Okay. I don't know how serious the conversation was, but I think there was a conversation. I don't necessarily, since it came out from people who I think would not make that claim lightly. Mm-hmm. But just the fact that this happened, a lot of Bitcoiners and crypto people in general, disdain the political process, which is fine. I mean, you have your opinion, but and they say, look, they're just politicians. They're just pandering to you. Well, yes, they are. I'd rather them pander than basically promise to destroy us. Like, it's a sea change, and they say, well, Trump, Biden, Kamala, RFK, they don't really mean what they say. Well, they're politicians. We know this. This is nothing special, nothing new. But just taking Trump as an example, putting Bitcoin and crypto in the Republican platform did one very important thing, which is made it respectable for every Republican to think about it and say, wait, this is legit.
Which is about half the country.
About half the country. And there is an internecine fight in the Democratic Party. I hope they come out in favor of crypto and Bitcoin, because that is better for everyone. We don't want this to be a wedge issue. We do not want this to be a political cudgel. But I'd rather it be a political cudgel than both sides hating us, Like, that's where we were just a couple of years ago. And now one side is embracing us and the other side is fighting about whether or not they're going to. That's good. And if they come out, if the Elizabeth Warren faction loses out, that's great. Because now we have, and then we're just arguing over, how good we have it. Mm. Right? And I think that the things like the ETFs, people see some people may believe this is selling out, that we're getting into a situation that, big money is coming in. Yes, A, it was always going to happen. B, that's good, because historically, when you have the big interests on your side, yeah, they're not aligned with you, but they're also not going to completely destroy you, because they would not shoot themselves in the foot like that. So yeah, it's not going to be necessarily, all unicorns and rainbows, but at least you know that they're not aligned out to get you anymore.
Do you think the states can ever get to a place where big interests are on our side?
I think we're there now. They're on our side. They have their own sub-interests. Clearly, they're going to want a lot more regulation than a lot of us would appreciate. Mm-hmm. But that's just the nature of the beast, right? But they, to the extent that regulation is moving in the direction, a generally positive direction, and now we're just in the position to tack it. So, we don't want necessarily complete minor centralization, because that would be bad. Because then you get
which we kind of have right now.
We do, although not as bad as a lot of people say, but much worse than it should be. Mm-hmm. But what we don't want is a CBDC by accident. Mm. But instead of fighting for the existence of Bitcoin and crypto, we're now fighting to prevent it from becoming something we don't like. That is a better fight, and that is an eminently winnable fight. And it's less of an existential threat. It still is bad if we lose it, but it's not what it could have been. So we could have ended up in the worst of all possible worlds, and now at least that is off the table. I hope.
Deep breath.
Yeah.
Biases aside, if that's possible, who do you think wins this election, and how important do you think the verdict is for the future of our industry in the U.S.?
Biases aside is a very hard question.
I know. We can nix that if you want.
No. It's a fair point. I'm going to do my best, and I will qualify that with I'll explain why I believe it. And so I think Trump wins. I think the Democrats lost the presidency the moment he stood up and got that picture taken, right after the assassination.
I would probably agree with that.
I'm a photographer as a hobby, and I learned to shoot on film back in the 90s.
Wow.
And so there's a couple of photographs in every era that just define it, and you can see it, and you know that that is one. Everyone agrees. That is a defining photograph, and once you have that, the narrative is there. Can Kamala still pull it out? Absolutely. I think if I were to handicap it, I'd say Trump has probably a 60 to 70% chance of winning. So that does mean that roughly 1 out of 3 times Kamala would win. And of course, black swans can happen in the next couple of months. Things can, who knows? God forbid, there's another attempt. Other things could happen. But aside from a major, sea-changing event, I think Trump walks away with it pretty handily.
Good.
I think that when he does that, he takes control of the Senate and maintains control of the House, maybe by slim margins. And yes, I think that is really, really good for us. The fact that Trump has said, I will stop a CBDC, and I will support self-custody, and I will support mining. I don't care why. That's important.
Do you think you'll live up to it?
Probably not to the extent that I want, but you look at politicians' promises, and do they ever live up to them? No, they don't. They live up to them in degrees. They almost never fail completely. They never succeed completely, but they almost never fail completely. So having put this out there as this is a thing I am doing, nailed it down into the platform. I think that the chances of an absolute abject failure are pretty slim. Will it go all the way I want? No. Will it get to a reasonable approximation of something that I think is livable? Yeah, I think so. I think that he picked J.D. Vance as his running mate, assuming that stays. J.D. Vance is young and known for positive remarks and policy in this direction. J.D. Vance went to Yale Law School and was friends with Vivek. Vivek is known in this space. You have Cynthia Lummis up there still working hard on all these things. You've got other senators starting to come on board. Just the fact that the 3 major candidates feel it necessary to come to an industry event to tell us that they are on our side, that right there tells you most of the story. Would they have come to any other industry event? We're a bunch of nerds, right? We're not like the National Association of Realtors or the bar, American Bar Association. These old staid organizations. We have like crazy T-shirts and memes everywhere, but they feel it necessary to come to us, to talk to us, and do so in a way that attempts. Now they're talking a language that is fairly foreign to a lot of us, but they're trying to reassure us that they deserve us to vote for them because they will help us. that's big. It may not feel like it's big, but it actually is pretty big. And if the Bitcoin community steps up and actually supports them, not just with donations, but also with with their votes and with talking about it, like it or not, that's how politics works. It has for hundreds of years. And it's dirty, it's messy, it's human, but it is. And Bitcoin doesn't fix that. Bitcoin fixes a lot of things, but human nature is still human nature. And what Bitcoin does, not just for the government, not just for the Federal Reserve, not just for people, it fixes the incentives. What the incentives do is they pervert human nature and make it work against itself. The proper incentives don't block human nature. They just align it. So human nature is still going to exist. You're still going to have politics. You need politics. If you don't have politics, you end up with effectively authoritarian communalism. I'm not going to say communism because it's not even that. You just like absolute non-thinking. Everybody do this one thing, or we do something nasty to you. But so we can't have that. That doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. So politics is always going to exist. What we don't want is the ability of the politics to become self-referential, where it supports itself and becomes basically almost a self-perpetuating Leviathan.
You mentioned Senator Loomis. It's interesting. I'll just take a step back. In Q1 of 2023, I was on the Twitter space, and I predicted that Bitcoin and crypto would be a political point of contention or a political talking point in 2024, and I was laughed at. I got to pull that clip and repost it. So it's crazy to see, like, fast forward a year and a half later, that come to fruition. Like you said, 2 out of 3 political candidates and folks like Senator Loomis pushing a what's called a strategic Bitcoin reserve, legislation for that. She's supposed to announce it. There's rumors of her announcing it, and there's also rumors of Trump potentially announcing it. What does that mean? What does a strategic Bitcoin reserve mean? And then do you think something like that would actually get passed?
So I have not read any legislation.
Okay.
So with that, I'll speculate a bit based on the terminology used, but Fort Knox is a strategic gold reserve. You have a hard asset that is limited in supply, and historically, sovereigns have collected that asset to use to back their currency. The U.S. dollar, initially, not now, but in the era of the gold back, was effectively a layer 2 on gold. Then it became completely delinked from gold, and finally delinked from gold with President Nixon. But it was a secondary layer on top of gold. So gold was the base, and we had a strategic gold reserve. We still do have we just have removed the convertibility. So if the U.S. government or other sovereigns create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, I see that as effectively creating a Fort Knox of Bitcoin that they can then potentially re-link the U.S. dollar to. If the U.S. dollar is a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin, is that optimal? No, I don't like it, but it works. You effectively have now removed a large part of the ability of the Federal Reserve to print unlimited dollars.
What would be more optimal?
Well, for me, more optimal would be some form of, I like Lightning. It's got issues. But I like something like that where it's a more direct link. But that's because I have been in it for a while. Will most people be able to understand that? Probably not. Lightning is, there's orders of magnitude of UX improvements before it can become what it needs to be. But the US dollar is basically there. If you basically just take the US dollar and the treasury and say, okay, $500,000 is one Bitcoin, and we say that's redeemable. Okay, well, now you've effectively recreated the gold standard with the dollar as a, with it instead of gold standard, it's a Bitcoin standard. Do I like it? No, it's not optimal because you still have all the KYC, you still have all of the intervention on the dollar side. But just like gold, and actually much better than gold, the government doesn't have a monopoly on gold. They have a whole lot of it, and they can, because of gold's characteristics and the fact that there's lots of paper gold out there, they can manipulate it all over the place. But they can't prevent me, if I have a bar of gold, from giving it to you. If I have a Bitcoin and they're on a Bitcoin standard, they can't prevent me from giving it to you. So yes, I think that there's lots of concerns, there's lots of problems, there's lots of perils in this, but it is a scalability solution that can work today with minimal technical intervention. All you're effectively doing is removing the ability of the Federal Reserve to print unlimited money and saying you can only print X.
It's better than what we currently have.
Yes.
Which is the point.
A lot of people, intentionally or not, make the perfect the enemy of the good, or the good enough. And
I've been guilty of that.
I have too. Everyone has. But yes, would everyone transacting on the Bitcoin base layer for everything be the perfect solution? Yeah, sure. We don't have the technical capacity. The trilemma prevents it, practically speaking. And so the perfect is impossible. Okay, so now that we know that perfect is impossible, step back from that. At what level are we comfortable? Well, we need to scale it. And if Bitcoin is to become a world reserve currency, then we need to scale it really fast. Well, we have this entire artifice that, after a fashion, does work. I mean, we have a multi-trillion-dollar economy that is humming along. It's got problems, but those problems are fixed by actually having a stable base unit. Well, we can swap out the non-existent base unit and put in a stable base unit and potentially fix a lot of those problems, and still get all of the inbuilt infrastructure. Don't need to burn down the bridges just because you found a better concrete.
Couldn't agree more. Colin, I could talk to you for hours. Unfortunately, we're short on time. I have one more question for you. I want to talk about Wyoming, and I can batch it together. What is Wyoming doing that, because I've been hearing for so long, Wyoming is a great place to go and start a new life. It's a great place to go for freedom. If you don't want to leave the US, check out Wyoming. Tax benefits, freedom, Bitcoin. Wyoming is a magnificent framework for what other states should do to realign with the ethos of what made the United States of America great to begin with, no pun intended.
Wyoming still has a very strong frontier mentality. When I moved from North Carolina to Wyoming during COVID, the reason I can trace it to a single podcast, and it was Caitlin Long talking to Peter McCormick and Tyler Lindholm and Trace Mayer, and one of the topics they talked about was. I mean, it was clearly they were talking about Bitcoin, but one of the other topics was Wyoming's Food Freedom Act. Well, that means like you can make food in your home and sell it at the farmer's market, and you don't have to worry about the health department. You don't have to worry about governmental intervention. You can just do it. Like, I don't know, we did for hundreds of thousands of years. But of course, it also means that if you screw up and you hurt somebody, it's on you. But that's a very open, honest kind of exchange, and that, plus a couple of other things, and the fact that all the good Bitcoin laws that they had passed there, for instance, the ability, if you have a wallet, the state of Wyoming cannot compel you to give up your private key. Now they can say you have to give us the money in that wallet, but they can't make you give up the private key. And a lot of people say, well, what's the difference? The difference is that private key could mean a lot more than just the 2 Bitcoin they may be asking for. What if you have a Bitcoin wallet that's got hierarchical deterministic other wallets that they don't know about? They only want 2 Bitcoin. You give them the 2 Bitcoin, but you have 3 over here. Well, now you've just disclosed you have these 3. Or what if at some point in the past, one of your other addresses you had used for something that is maybe slightly less than legal. Well, by giving up your private key, you're effectively admitting to a crime, which, oh wait, don't we have a constitutional amendment about that? So the fact that Wyoming has stated up front, we cannot demand your private key, that's a big deal. We also have other things like lien washing and some very technical legal aspects about how this stuff works, but taken together, it has made Wyoming to be the most forward-thinking and friendliest jurisdiction in the United States and possibly the world for how this stuff works. We also have a DAO LLC, which obviously this doesn't come to play with Bitcoin, but on any blockchain that has smart contracts, you can basically have an entire company that is controlled by the smart contract. And it has legal existence, just like a normal LLC, except it has the smart contract that is effectively the operating agreement. We recently passed something called a DUNA, a decentralized unincorporated nonprofit association, which is like a DAO, but a nonprofit. So this is the kind of innovation. Wyoming has really been on the forefront of a lot of things. It was the invention of the LLC in the 70s was in Wyoming. The dominant corporate form that people use today was invented by Wyoming. Wyoming was the first state with a female governor and the first state to allow women to vote. So the frontier mentality of Wyoming is amazing. It's got a small population. Yeah, it's about 560, 580,000 people, and a lot of land. And it can be, it can be a little windy. It's a little windy, but I love it. It's a wonderful place to live. It's not for everyone in terms of the climate and everything, but constitutional carry, no income tax, low other taxes, although some of my Wyoming friends would disagree. I've lived on the East Coast. I know what taxes can look like that are much worse. Generally speaking, just a can-do positive attitude about things that and government gets out of the way kind of situation. And I love it personally.
Colin, it's been an absolute pleasure. One nugget of wisdom for the audience before you head out.
What?
I'll put you on the spot.
Okay. Not financial advice, but buy now, don't sell. Things are going to get wild, but hold on for dear life.
Simple but powerful. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you.